In the year 79 AD, a 17-year-old boy watched the sky above the Bay of Naples turn black at noon. The darkness, he later wrote, felt blacker and denser than any ordinary night, not like clouds or a storm, but like being sealed inside a room that has never once seen light. People screamed around him that there were no more gods, that this eternal night meant the world itself had ended. The sea pulled back from the shore as though the earth inhaled, stranding fish on dry sand where water had been moments before. His mother begged him to run, and he grabbed her hand and forced her to walk faster. That boy survived, and he wrote every detail down. 2,000 years later, we named the most violent category of volcanic eruption on Earth after him. His name was Pliny the Younger, and everything he described, every sound, and every moment of confusion and disbelief unfolded across roughly 18 hours. This is the story of one day in Pompeii. The eruption released energy equivalent to 100,000 times the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Roughly 4 cubic kilometers of magma shot into the atmosphere, and a column of ash and rock climbed 33 kilometers into the stratosphere. An entire city vanished under 6 meters of volcanic debris, its homes, temples, bakeries, bathhouses, brothels, and election posters and all, in less time than it takes you to sleep through a single night. By the end of this, you will understand why standing in that city, when the mountain opened, would have given you absolutely no way out. But here is the part nobody talks about, the part before any of it, before the fire, before the ash, before the sky turned dark. Because Pompeii, in the summer of 79 AD, was not some backwater farming village waiting to die. Somewhere between 11 and 20,000 people called it home, and by the standards of the ancient world, it qualified as a thriving, noisy, genuinely pleasant place to live. Pompeii sat on a lava plateau about 40 meters above sea level, roughly 8 kilometers southeast of Vesuvius. Walls enclosed 66 hectares, with 7 gates and 12 towers guarding the perimeter. Nearby towns dotted the coastline: Herculaneum, about 5 kilometers west of the vent, Oplontis, Stabiae, and the Roman naval base at Misenum, sitting 30 kilometers across the bay. Every one of them lay within reach of the mountain, and none of them understood what that meant. Wine dominated the economy, with Campanian vineyards climbing almost to the summit of the volcano itself, and the product traveling everywhere. Rome's legions carried it. But the real fortune came from garum, fermented fish sauce, which sounds disgusting until you realize it functioned as the single most important condiment in Roman cooking, a combination of soy sauce, ketchup, and Worcestershire in a single bottle. A tycoon named Aulus Umbricius Scaurus controlled the Pompeian garum market so thoroughly that his name turned up on more than 50 containers pulled from the ruins, and the best product fetched 1,000 sesterces per 12 pints. For all practical purposes, the man operated as the Roman Empire's fish sauce oligarch. Beyond garum, a full-scale textile industry hummed along. 13 workshops processing raw wool, 7 for spinning, 9 for dyeing, and 18 Fulonici running as commercial laundries. The preferred cleaning agent at these laundries turned out to be human urine, collected in public pots on street corners, because the ammonia content worked as an effective bleach. And that tells you a great deal about what the streets of Pompeii smelled like on a warm afternoon, which also explains why nobody seemed particularly bothered by the sulfur drifting off the mountain. More than 900 commercial and craft premises operated within the walls, and over 150 thermopolia, ancient hot food counters, served meals directly on the street. One of those counters, fully excavated in 2020, still held duck, pork, goat, fish, land snails, and fava beans inside its serving containers. A 2,000-year-old lunch order, sitting there in perfect detail, on the ancient Roman equivalent of leaving your food on the counter when the fire alarm goes off, except the fire alarm turned out to be a volcano. Daily life in Pompeii followed a rhythm you would recognize instantly. Dawn meant waking, breakfast meant bread and cheese, and the morning hours belonged to work and shopping along the main streets. Early afternoon pulled you toward the public baths, where at least 4 or 5 complexes operated around the city, including the Stabian baths dating back to the 2nd century BC. Bathing cost so little that even slaves attended, and the baths functioned as the social hub where business, gossip, and politics all tangled together. After that came the amphitheater, as a stone venue built around 70 BC that seated 20,000 spectators and ranked among the oldest permanent amphitheaters in the Roman world, hosting gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, and theater performances. You could gamble on dice, too, which technically qualified as illegal except during Saturnalia, a rule enforced with roughly the same rigor as a modern jaywalking statute. Democracy also ran through daily life here. 2 supreme magistrates called duoviri won annual elections in March and took office July 1st, with 2 junior aediles managing streets, markets, and public order below them. A council of 80 to 100 lifelong members oversaw finances, and all eligible males voted across 5 constituencies. Roughly half of all graffiti found in Pompeii relates to the 79 AD elections, one with trade guilds endorsing candidates on the city walls, carrying all the enthusiasm of modern super PACs. And that graffiti, all 11,000 catalogued pieces of it, constitutes the largest surviving collection from the ancient world, and reads exactly the way you would expect wall scrawl to read in any city, in any century. On the basilica wall, someone scratched out, "Oh walls, you have held up so much tedious graffiti that I am amazed you have not already collapsed in ruin." An inn visitor confessed, "We have wet the bed. I admit we were wrong, my host. If you ask why, there was no chamber pot." Over at the gladiator barracks, someone felt compelled to inform posterity that Celadus the Thracian makes the girls moan. One homeowner declared, "I don't want to sell my husband, not for all the gold in the world." And on a latrine wall, a man called Apollinaris, who proudly identified himself as doctor to the Emperor Titus, announced that he had a good crap here. Real people doing exactly what you do, complaining, bragging, declaring love, mocking politicians, and writing things on bathroom walls that they probably should not have committed to stone. Pompeii also housed the Lupanar, a purpose-built 2-story brothel with 10 rooms, stone beds, and explicit frescoes above each doorway, functioning as a visual menu for the clientele. Over 120 graffiti scrawled by clients and workers survived inside. Prostitution ran legally and cheaply, with prices ranging from 2 to 16 asses, and for scale, a loaf of bread cost about 2 asses, which meant certain services could be purchased for the price of a sandwich. Speaking of bread, but one bakery contained 81 round loaves, still sitting inside the oven, carbonized but perfectly preserved, and one of them still carried the baker's stamp. A 2,000-year-old bread roll with the brand name still visible. What separated the people of Pompeii from you came down to geography alone. They lived 8 kilometers from a volcano they did not recognize as a volcano. And that part matters. Several ancient writers noticed something off about Vesuvius, including the geographer Strabo, who described the summit as flat, barren, and ash-colored, with rocks that looked as though fire had eaten through them. Strabo correctly guessed the mountain once burned, but Vesuvius had sat dormant for 295 years, nearly 3 centuries of quiet, with vineyards blanketing its slopes. Back in 73 BC, the rebel gladiator Spartacus used the crater as a military hideout because everyone considered it perfectly safe. A wall painting from the House of the Centenary even depicts Vesuvius as a single green peak draped in grapevines and devoted to the god Bacchus. The image shows a garden, but what sat beneath that garden was a bomb. Warnings came, because warnings always come. On February the 5th, 62 AD, 17 years before the eruption, a major earthquake estimated at magnitude 5 to 6 severely damaged both Pompeii and Herculaneum. And by 79, the city still had not finished rebuilding from it. Minor earthquakes rattled the region in the days immediately before the eruption. Wells dried up without explanation, and livestock near the mountain dropped dead, likely from toxic gas seeping through the soil. But as Pliny the Younger later wrote, the tremors caused no particular alarm because they are frequent in Campania. That sentence is the ancient Roman equivalent of Californians shrugging off a magnitude 4 during brunch, normal and fine, right up until it turns out to be neither of those things. Nobody evacuated, and nobody even discussed it. And then around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, on what is traditionally dated August 24th, 79 AD, Vesuvius stopped being patient. A quick note on that date, because it remains genuinely contested. Pliny's letters provide the traditional August 24th date, and 95% of surviving manuscripts agree on it. But archaeologists have pulled autumn fruits from the ruins: pomegranates, walnuts, chestnuts. Victims wore heavy woolen clothing, and a sealed wine vessel suggests post-harvest fermentation had already begun. A charcoal inscription discovered in 2018 carried the equivalent of October 17th, meaning someone alive in the city scratched a note on a wall well after August 24th. What matters for this story is not the exact date, but the fact that on whatever day it happened, nobody saw it coming. Within minutes, the eruption column reached 27 kilometers high, 3 times the cruising altitude of a commercial airplane. Watching from Misenum, 30 kilometers across the bay, Pliny the Younger described the cloud as resembling an Italian stone pine tree, a long trunk of great height spreading into branches at the top, sometimes white and sometimes dirty, and spotted with earth and cinders. As that description proved so precise that modern volcanologists formally adopted it, and a Plinian eruption now sits as the most violent classification in their entire system, named after a teenager who simply tried to describe the worst thing he ever witnessed. And that's when your survival window starts closing. Roughly 1.5 million tons of material per second blasted from the vent, with the prevailing wind pushing pumice, lightweight volcanic rock, directly south-southeast over Pompeii. Pumice rained down on the city like hail within the first hour, accumulating at 12 to 15 centimeters per hour, and within 4 hours it reached 50 to 75 centimeters. None of that sounds catastrophic until you think about the roof above your head. Here's the thing about pumice. Once it piles up, the weight builds fast. But Roman roofs carried no engineering for volcanic loads, and after 4 to 5 hours of continuous accumulation, roofs started collapsing across the city. 38% of Pompeii's victims, more than a third of everyone who died, perished this way, crushed inside the buildings they believed would shelter them, killed not by the volcano directly, but by their own architecture. Anyone with sense already fled, and the evidence confirms most people did exactly that. Stables turned up empty, carts and horses gone, and strong boxes had been opened and emptied before departure. An estimated 80 to 90% of the population escaped, which qualifies as the only good news in this entire account, although good news feels generous when the alternative involves burial under 6 meters of volcanic debris. But roughly 2,000 people stayed behind. Some were elderly or too sick to travel, and some were enslaved, physically unable to leave without their owner's permission, a detail worth letting settle for a moment. Others, based on bodies found clutching gold jewelry, coins, and gemstone rings, refused to abandon their wealth. One woman discovered near the gladiator barracks wore 4 bracelets and 2 gemstone rings, including an Egyptian emerald and a garnet engraved with a chariot. Everything she valued stayed in her hands, and none of it saved her. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, the eruption intensified as the column tapped into deeper magma and the falling pumice shifted from white to grey as the column climbed to its maximum height of 33 kilometers, while earthquake activity accelerated and a mild tsunami churned through the Bay of Naples. And during all of this, Pliny the Elder, the younger's uncle, commander of the Roman imperial fleet at Misenum and author of Naturalis Historia, a 37-volume encyclopedia considered the first ever published, sailed directly toward the eruption. A desperate letter from a woman named Rectina, stranded near the volcano, reached him and converted his scientific curiosity into a rescue mission. When his helmsman urged retreat, the reply came back as, "Fortune favors the brave," which is the kind of statement that sounds magnificent in a biography and catastrophically misguided in a risk assessment. Stabiae received him, about 16 kilometers from the vent, where his friend Senator Pomponianus sat stranded. What Pliny the Elder did upon arrival tells you everything you need to know about the man. He bathed, ate dinner, and went to sleep, snoring loudly enough to be heard outside the door. Whether that constituted courage or resignation, nobody alive can tell you. Midnight arrived with pumice accumulation, reaching roughly 2.5 to 3 meters, about 9 feet. Pompeii lay buried to the level of its first-floor windows. If you remained inside at this point, your front door could not open because the pumice sat higher than the door frame, and your only exit led through a second-story window into total darkness onto a shifting surface of hot volcanic rock, in an atmosphere choked with sulfur and ash. The sea churned in turmoil. The ground refused to stop shaking, and every few minutes, the building you stood in groaned in ways buildings should never groan. And then, around 1 o'clock in the morning, the eruption entered the phase that killed everyone who remained. But we have only reached the halfway point, and we have not covered what happened to Herculaneum yet, or the pyroclastic surges, or the temperatures involved, or the 2024 DNA study that proved the families in the plaster casts turned out to be strangers all along, or the children's charcoal drawings found next to a fresco of Helen of Troy. You want to stay for all of that. 1 in the morning on August 25th, and the eruption column, sustained for 12 continuous hours, pushing material higher than commercial aircraft fly for half a day, finally collapsed. Gravity won, and everything that had been traveling upward started racing back down at speed. That collapse produced a pyroclastic surge, a ground-hugging avalanche of superheated gas and pulverized rock. And if the pumice fall counted as survivable, this did not. Herculaneum took the first hit. 5 kilometers from the vent, it had been a wealthy resort town of about 4,000 to 5,000 residents, and most had evacuated during the pumice fall since the wind pushed the debris away from them. But roughly 300 people never left. They sheltered inside 12 vaulted stone chambers along the ancient shoreline, the beachfront boathouses, waiting for rescue boats that would never arrive. Temperatures in the initial surge reached 495 to 555 degrees Celsius, and for reference, your kitchen oven tops out at roughly 260. Death at those temperatures arrived faster than the nerve impulse needed to register pain. Those skeletons went undiscovered until 1980, when excavations along the waterfront overturned the century-old belief that Herculaneum had been completely evacuated. 300 people waiting for boats in the dark, and the only mercy in this story is that they did not have to wait long. Successive surges progressively buried Herculaneum under what would become 20 to 25 meters of material. A third surge reached Pompeii's walls without deeply penetrating the city, killing people just outside, while those inside allowed themselves to believe the worst had passed. Around dawn, a brief lull settled in, and the ashfall eased, and some who had already fled actually turned around and started walking back. None of them should have. Between 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning, the eruption column underwent total collapse, and the fourth pyroclastic surge, the one that ended everything, struck Pompeii. Superheated gas and volcanic debris traveling at 100 to 300 kilometers per hour at temperatures around 300 degrees Celsius engulfed the entire city in minutes. Every person still inside died instantly as their muscles locked in cadaveric spasm, freezing their bodies in whatever position they occupied at the moment of death, hands covering faces, arms wrapped around children who turned out to be strangers, legs caught mid-stride toward gates they would never pass through. But one victim found outside the gymnasium clutched a wooden box containing scalpels, tweezers, and surgical instruments. A doctor who apparently stayed behind to help the injured before finally attempting to flee, and who did not make it. Inside the gladiator barracks, technically the quadriporticus of the theater, repurposed after the 62 AD earthquake, at least 18 skeletons crowded a single small room, women and children among them, who took shelter alongside the fighters. One woman among them wore 4 gold bracelets and 2 gemstone rings, and for over a century she carried the romantic backstory of a wealthy matron secretly visiting her gladiator lover, when she almost certainly just ran to the nearest solid building available. That surge is the moment preserved in Fiorelli's plaster casts. Not a slow death, not suffocation, but a single instantaneous wave of heat, so extreme that death preceded awareness. A 5th surge followed, then a 6th, the largest, reaching all the way to Stabiae, where Pliny the Elder walked to the beach to check whether the sea offered any escape. Flames and sulfur fumes scattered his companions, and he lay down on a sheet, asked twice for cold water, then collapsed. 2 days later, his body turned up intact, looking, according to his nephew, more like a man asleep than dead. 55 years old, and modern scholars attribute the cause to a heart attack or stroke, since the companions who ran managed to survive. Late morning on August 25th brought the end. 18 hours of continuous eruption left Pompeii under 4 to 6 meters of deposits and Herculaneum under 25, with energy output equivalent to 100,000 times the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs combined. Writing a decade later, the poet Martial mourned the world that vanished. The hills Bacchus loved more than Nysa, where satyrs danced and Venus claimed as home. Everything, he wrote, now lay drowned in flames and sorrowful ash, and even the gods could have wished such destruction had not been permitted them. Cassius Dio, the Roman historian working over a century after the event, described people who believed the giants rose in revolt, while others thought the entire universe dissolved into chaos or fire, and he reported that the ash drifted as far as Africa, Syria, Egypt, and Rome itself. And then the Roman state did what states do. Emperor Titus, barely 2 months into his reign, appointed 2 ex-consuls as relief coordinators, donated from the imperial treasury, granted 5 years of tax relief, redistributed the property of those who died without heirs, and visited the disaster zone twice. Suetonius captured the response by writing that Titus showed not merely the concern of an emperor, but a father's surpassing love. Survivors scattered along the Italian coast, with the Sulpicius family relocating to Cumae, and the Caltilius family settling in Ostia, where they built a temple. Aulus Umbricius revived his Garum empire in Puteoli, and named his firstborn, Puteolanus, after the new hometown. And what genuinely astonishes is that some survivors came back. They built shacks in the upper floors of buried buildings, cooked food in makeshift ovens atop the ash, and archaeological evidence confirms that Pompeii's poorest survivors inhabited the ruins through the 5th century, living on top of their own city's grave for 400 years. Over the centuries that followed, the name itself disappeared, and the area became known simply as La Civita, the city. 1,700 years of burial passed before systematic excavation began in 1748. When Goethe visited in 1787, he wrote, "Many disasters have befallen the world, but few have brought posterity so much joy," which ranks as an astonishingly callous thing to say about a mass casualty event, and also happens to be completely correct. The site endured well for something 2,000 years old, although not without help from the worst possible source. In 1943, Allied bombers dropped approximately 165 to 170 bombs across 9 raids on the archaeological site, damaging frescoes, monuments, and the antiquarium. The first of those raids fell, with grim coincidence, on the night of August 24th. Vesuvius itself erupted again the following year, its most recent eruption in 1944, destroying nearby villages and damaging 78 to 88 American B-25 bombers parked at Pompeii airfield. Apparently, the mountain does not appreciate competition. Everything changed when Giuseppe Fiorelli took over as director in 1860. Systematic excavation replaced treasure hunting, along with the 9-region numbering system archaeologists still use today. And then on February the 5th, 1863, Fiorelli poured liquid plaster into the hollow, left by a decomposed body in the hardened ash, and produced the first cast of a Vesuvius victim. 104 casts have followed since then, including adults, children, and a guard dog still tethered by its bronze collar, twisting upward, straining to climb above the rising ash. Discovered in 1874 in the house of Vesonius Primus, and still one of the most devastating objects ever pulled from the ground. 13 casts fill the garden of the fugitives, 5 adults, 3 young adults, 3 boys, and two small children, one of them approximately 12 to 14 months old, the youngest victim ever recovered at Pompeii. All of them fled toward the Nocera Gate, already standing on 3.5 meters of accumulated pumice when the surge overtook them, and some with hands pressed over their faces and others positioned as if shielding the person beside them. For decades, the standard narrative described them as families embracing in their final moments, parents sheltering children, lovers holding each other. And then a 2024 DNA study dismantled all of it. Researchers from the University of Florence, Harvard, and the Max Planck Institute extracted ancient DNA from 14 of the casts, and the results overturned decades of assumption. 4 bodies in the House of the Golden Bracelet, 2 adults and 2 children, long described as a family, turned out completely unrelated to each other. The adult wearing the golden bracelet, always identified as the mother, turned out to be an unrelated adult male. 2 figures from the House of the Cryptoporticus, romanticized for generations as the embracing sisters, included at least 1 male. The people of Pompeii did not die as families. They died as strangers thrown together by catastrophe, reaching for whoever stood closest in the dark. That is a more human story than the comfortable fiction we told ourselves for 160 years. And the fact that it took ancient DNA to reveal it says something about how badly we wanted the other version to be true. Roughly 2/3 of Pompeii sits exposed now, and the remaining third lies underground, still producing finds that reshape our understanding. In 2024, excavators uncovered a banquet hall with black-painted walls bearing frescoes of Helen of Troy and Paris, labeled in Greek alongside Apollo and Cassandra, with a white mosaic floor assembled from over 1 million tiny tiles. On adjacent walls, children estimated at ages 5 to 7 left charcoal drawings of stick figure gladiators and crude shapes, kids' artwork preserved for 2,000 years on the walls of a room they probably should not have been in. February 2025 yielded only the second large-scale Dionysian fresco ever found at Pompeii, a painting already a century old when the volcano buried it. And in May of 2025, 4 bodies emerged from a house where the occupants dragged a bed frame against their bedroom door to barricade themselves in, and it did not save them. Over 4 million visitors walked through the site in 2024, and a daily cap of 20,000 with personalized named tickets went into effect that November. Standard admission costs €18, and a €230 million project aims to link Pompeii with surrounding sites into a single dispersed archaeological park. 8 kilometers to the northwest, Vesuvius still stands. The last eruption came in 1944, relatively minor at VEY3, and the current alert level sits at green with only fumarolic activity detected. But the established pattern with this volcano remains consistent. The longer the silence stretches, the more violent the reawakening tends to be. 700 to 800,000 people now occupy the designated red zone across 25 municipalities, and the broader Naples metropolitan area places 3 million within potential reach. 72 hours is what the official evacuation plan allows, 12 to organize, 48 to transfer, and 12 held in reserve, as all carried out with 500 buses and 220 trains running per day. Authorities believe roughly 2 weeks of warning will precede any eruption, and the Italian government has offered €30,000 to any family that voluntarily relocates out of the zone. Almost nobody has taken the money. The Osservatorio Vesuviano, founded in 1841, as the world's first volcanological observatory, monitors the mountain around the clock with seismographs, GPS arrays, tilt meters, gravimeters, geochemical sensors, and satellite radar. No volcano on the planet receives more surveillance. But here is the detail that will follow you out of this story. In 79 AD, Vesuvius had been quiet for 295 years. Wells dried up, the ground shook for days, and livestock dropped dead on the slopes. And when the tremors rattled dishes and cracked plaster, Pliny tells us nobody felt alarmed, because that counted as normal, just what life in Campania felt like. 3 million people live there now, and the alert level reads green. Vineyards grow on the slopes again, and the mountain sits quiet, 82 years into its current silence. But patience has never been the same thing as peace, and it never will be.